Okay. Good afternoon to everyone in Indonesia and around the Southeast Asian region. And good morning or good evening to everyone else joining us from other parts of the world. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to today's training webinar on circular economy in the food and beverage industry, lessons learned from Europe and ASEAN. This training event is held as part of the local capacity building by the ASEAN-Norwegian Cooperation, ASEANO. My name is Nadira from CSEAS Indonesia, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. This session will run for 2 hours, and I will be joined by 5 distinguished speakers as our panelists today. In order of the presentation, first we will have Dr. Valentina Tartiu from the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, or NIVA for short, who will present on the circular economy and the experience from the European food and beverage industry. Second, we will have Mr. Edwin Sia from Food Industry Asia to present his topic on circular economy in the food and beverage industry. Third, we will have Mr. Arisman from Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Indonesia, to present on the circular economy in Indonesia. Fourth, we will have Mr. Tiono from Coca-Cola Indonesia to present his topic on circular economy in the beverage industry. Last but not least, our fifth speaker today will be Mr. Edwin Ignacis from De La Salle University, Dasmariñas, to present on the circular economy in the Philippines. Each speaker will have approximately 20 minutes to present each of their topics, and at the end of this training session, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. Regarding that, before we start, I would like to explain a few ground rules to be followed in today's training webinar. If you can please, thank you. First, the Q&A session will only be done through YouTube's chatbox function. Second, for participants who wish to ask a question, please write it in the format like so: the name of organization, / your name, / gender, / the question for the specific speaker or a general open question. Please make sure that your questions are written in English, and at the end of the session, only the most relevant questions will be picked to be answered by the respective speakers due to the time constraint. So without further ado, I officially begin this regional training webinar by inviting our first speaker of today, Dr. Valentina Tartiu from NIVA, to present her topic. Dr. Valentina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadira, and thank you, CSEAS, for the kind invitation to contribute to this training course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valentina Tartiu. I'm a research scientist at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, and I'm very pleased to take you today to a short sustainability journey. In the first part, we will take a closer look at the circular economy from a more practical perspective, focusing on metrics and extended producer responsibility role. Whereas in the second part, we will take a closer look at the European food and beverage industry and its challenges in shifting towards a circular economy. Next slide, please. Circular economy way of thinking has been around since the 70s. In 1966, the American economist Kenneth Boulding has introduced the concept of a cyclical system that is regenerative and zero waste, where the finite resources on Earth are recycled and their value is optimized. Since then, the concept has evolved and built upon several existing theories like environmental economics, industrial ecology, general systems theory. In fact, the word circular economy was first mentioned by the environmental economist Pearson Tanner in the 1990s. To date, there is no standardized definition of the circular economy, and in practice, many countries and municipalities have constructed their own circular economy definition, or they have expanded an existing one based on practice and working with the concept. If we have to name some key elements of the circular economy, we can mention the prioritization of the regenerative resources, design for the future, waste as a resource, collaborate to create a joint value, and so forth. Despite the circular economy thinking has been around since the 70s, policies have been explicitly referred to the circular economy only in the 2000s, and EU and China have been the global frontrunners in this process. In Europe, high-level discussions on the circular economy began in 2011 in the context of concerns around high commodity prices, and EU has announced its highly ambitious action plan for the circular economy in 2015. Next slide, please. Circular economy is a model that looks at human society from a system perspective, where both technical cycles that use innovation to close the loop for materials and products, and the biological cycles that look at the organic materials and nutrients are recognized, and preference is given for cycles that are being closed on a local scale for both. Thus, the circular economy is a system that is restorative and regenerative by intention and design. It replaces the end-of-life concept with restoration, shifts towards the use of renewable energy, eliminates the use of toxic chemicals, and aims to eliminate the waste through a better design of products. The circular economy is transformative, systemic, and functional. Transformative because it implies a cultural shift towards different production and consumption patterns and new business and governance models. Systemic as it requires a holistic approach that cuts across sectorial policies. Functional as it goes beyond the administrative boundaries of cities in order to close too narrow or slow loops at the right scale. Next slide, please. As one cannot improve what cannot be measured, policymakers, practitioners, and scholars have urged the need of measurements frameworks for the circular economy. Why is it important to measure the circular economy? Detect what works, what doesn't, and the state of advancement. The evaluation of the results helps identify what can be improved in the future. So monitor the performance and evaluate of results counts. In addition, measuring progress and impact of circular economy related initiatives can help raise awareness towards more sustainable production and consumption patterns. In addition, a good understanding of the benefits and costs by type of activity or sector contributes to establish priorities, to allocate financial resources and stimulate innovation and cooperation. In other words, contributes to unlock the great potential that key sectors hold in applying the circular economy. Next, please. We've seen why measuring circular economy is important, but how can we measure the circularity of a product, of a value chain, or organization? There is an increasing need of businesses for tools that can enable the shift for a circular business model. To accommodate this increasing needs, a series of frameworks have been developed by various organizations like World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Circle Economy, and so on. The various frameworks propose different types of indicators that can be grouped into three distinct categories. Headline indicators that are strongly linked to the question, why do we need to change our business? This type of indicators can help us understand the current state of circularity, how circular is our business, our product, or our sector. They can also help us understand how far we are from our goal and whether the business is moving in the right direction. Performance indicators, on the other hand, they go a step further than the headline indicators, and they try to address the question, what should be changed in our value chain? So instead of giving a verdict of the current state of our business, the goal of the performance indicators is to show how we perform on the parameters that directly influence our current state. So they have a strong focus on the various production steps and materials flows in our value chain, and they provide insights where the intervention is needed. Examples of performance indicators may include the waste that is generated within each step of the value chain, the share of secondary resources that is used within a company production process, or the recycling rate of a product. The process indicators, they are helpful in addressing the question, how can we bring about the required change? If performance indicators are used to identify where the change is needed, the process indicators are used to identify how that change can be brought about. And they are linked to culture, market failure, human behavior, operational activities, and institutional reform. There is a wide variety of indicators to choose from simple descriptive indicators that communicate whether or not a company has implemented a certain waste management policy, to more complex indicators that can provide us insights into the customer's opinion of green alternative for our company products. Currently, there are various options available to anyone interested in measuring the progress towards circular economy. And I've included here some of the most well-known and widely available options. I will not get into details. I have included for each of them the link to the source, so at your own pace, and you could have a closer look at these frameworks. Most of them are focusing on two or all indicators. A few of them focus only on one type of indicators, and the majority of them put forward a self-assessment tool for businesses in order to understand where they are and how can they achieve the circular economy goals. Next slide, please. The Board of Innovation, in one of their latest reports called Business Models That Work in the Circular Economy, have made a recommendation of translating our business goals or strategy into tangible key performance indicators. And I've included here as an example some indicators that a company should take into account. For instance, in the production phase, make, we should try to increase the percentage of renewable energy that is used in our production and distribution process, and as well as the percentage of products that are designed with the recyclability and repairability in mind. Whereas on the end of life, we should focus on increasing the products that are used as a feedstock in other businesses. Next slide, please. Extended producer responsibility was initially introduced as an environmental policy instrument in the late 80s in various Northwestern European countries, and was proposed as a way to improve resource efficiency and as a response to the challenges that many municipalities were facing in managing waste that was growing in volume and complexity. To this end, the extended producer responsibility has emerged as a significant tool which can foster the enforcement of the circular economy requirements in the field of EU waste law and policy. The main aims of extended producer responsibility are to cover the product's end-of-life costs, to provide eco-design incentives, to achieve resource efficiency, to ensure high quality of recycling. And the most widely used categories of extended producer responsibility instruments are product take-back requirements, economic and market-based instruments, regulation and performance standards, and information-based instruments. Next slide, please. In Europe, there is a great variety in the way of of how extended producer responsibility schemes have been applied. We have countries that have put in place this type of scheme, both for households, but also for commercial and industrial waste. Countries in which there are different schemes running, and the producer responsibility organizations are cooperating together. There are also countries where this is run with the same rule for all type of packaging. Extended producer responsibility schemes have been key to facilitate the plastic packaging collection and recovery in Europe, in particular for household packaging. And there is also an extended producer responsibility alliance that has been founded in 2013 and has the authoritative voice and is a common policy platform for all its members that are interested in packaging recovery and recycling. Next slide, please. So when we are talking about the role we envision for extended producer responsibility in order to advance the circular economy, I decided to share with you today the results of a very recent study that has been conducted by a team of researchers in the Netherlands. And after reviewing extensively the literature review and conducting a Delphi study on the experience with extended producer responsibility in the Netherlands, they are proposing two different pathways. The first pathway refers to optimizing extended producer responsibility as an instrument for post-user circularity. In doing so, the authors suggested we could address some limitations like that have been noted with the LPR schemes, like markets for secondary materials that are not being actively strengthened, and legitimacy of extended producer responsibility schemes that depends on the degree of full participation of all producers and importers, as well as the level of control over the full volume of the post-consumer waste generated. Who should be part of this scheme? On the supply side, we have products. We have producer, importers, retailers. On the side of the value retention, we have economic actors that are all engaged in collection, repairing, refurbishing, reselling. And of course, society has to be involved and has to be responsible for the long term of circular economy transition and set the boundaries and the targets. This pathway is envisioned to be applied to the current extended producer responsibility schemes. Next slide, please. The second pathway looks at EPR as an instrument for circular economy transformation, putting the focus on eco-design targets that must cover aspects like share of recycled content, arrangements for repair, and implementation agreements that must be connected to current sector transition agendas. Next slide, please. Now let's have a closer look at the European food and beverage industry and its challenges and opportunities in shifting to a circular economy. The food and beverage industry in Europe is the largest manufacturing industry in terms of turnover, value added, and employment. Is very diverse with sectors that range from fruit and vegetable, dairy, and drinks. The top 5 sectors are bakery products, meat, dairy, drinks, and various food products, and they represent 3/4 of the total turnover and more than 80% of the total number of employed persons and companies. Small, medium enterprises generate more than 40% of the food and beverage industry turnover and provide more than half of the jobs in the sector. There are several industry associations that exist, and I have included here the most relevant ones: Food Drink Europe, the European Soft Drink Association, the European Organization for Packaging and the Environment, and also two initiatives that bring together actors in the field, like the CFlex, the Circular Economy for Flexible Packaging, and Packaging Recyclability Roadmap that provides a dynamic online information tool allowing users to self-assess the recyclability of packaging. Next slide, please. So the landscape for the European food and beverage industry, the political policy landscape has evolved since the essential requirements were first established. A series of directives and strategies have been put forward. And now, nowadays, all actors in this industry have to cope with very ambitious targets and requirements. Given the time is running, I will not enter into details. Next slide, please. In order to face all these ambitious challenges, requirements, and targets, different actors in the sector, together with governments, they have worked together and developed a European Plastic Pact that is aimed at design, responsible reuse, recycling capacity, and the use of recycled content. And this pact is seen as a platform to exchange ideas, displays good practices, discuss challenges, and the need to build a circular default for all to follow. I have included here the European Plastic Pact roadmap that you could have a look at afterwards. Next slide, please. Here, just an example of what is the current status of the deposit return systems in Europe. As you can see, we have the Nordic countries that have implemented this type of instrument in the 90s, early 2000, and some other European countries that are in the process of doing so. Next slide, please. Here is an example of products that are covered by the deposit return system in Europe, and those countries that have introduced this type of instrument early, like in early 2000, they are covering more type of products than the ones that have recently introduced this type of scheme. Next slide, please. Food, in terms of food packaging in the circular economy, the main aims are at clean material cycles and safe food, focusing on avoiding multi-layers, safe recycling, improved sorting, ban of chemicals of concern. Recycling of food packaging waste into new food packaging presents particular challenges, especially with regards to safety. So chemical safety aspects is a matter of great concern among all European food and beverage producers, as recycling is currently seen as an important measure to manage packaging waste. Next slide, please. Some key issues to consider when designing and selecting sustainable food packaging options. Packaging must be designed with the 3R in mind: reduce, reuse, recycling, should include clear marking, content information, and recycling guidance, and should consider a minimum content of recycled content to create a solid market that demands to be fed to recycling plants. And last but not least, transition to bioplastic must be done wisely, filtered through the circular economy principles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Valentina, for an insightful presentation on circular economy, including the metrics used, the EPR concept, and the application in the case of Europe. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Edwin Chia to present his topic. Mr. Edwin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nadira, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by thanking also CSEAS for this kind invitation to share with you some of the practical applications of both circularity as well as EPR in the food and beverage industry. Nadira, if we can go to the first slide.
Yes, please, Miss Annie.
Oh, and maybe while we're waiting for the first slide, I thought I just wanted to introduce a little bit about Food Industry Asia. So we are a Singapore-based trade body, and our members are multinational food and beverage brands operating in Asia. Many of the brands you'll be familiar with, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Nestle, Danone, and Unilever, for example. And how we work is we work very closely with stakeholders, so governments, industry. We've worked with national industry bodies. So for example, in Indonesia is GAPMI, and we also work very closely with academia and international organizations like the World Bank, with the United Nations Environment. Because I think at the end of the day, if we want to drive on solutions, whether it's circularity or EPR, we need to do it collectively. And we need to do it constructively with all the stakeholders involved to push things forward. Oops, is it me? I'm not seeing my slides.
Yeah. In 1 minute.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes. So maybe we can go on to the next few slides. Yes, the next one. And the next one. Yes, thank you. So, okay, I think Valentina had spent a bit of time sharing about circularity, definitions and concepts. So I won't really spend too much time on that, but just, some of the key points which we probably all know, in terms of circularity, why is it important, why is it needed, and obviously our global experience on supply chains and COVID-19, and even the recent blockage of the Suez Canal by the ship that held up traffic, shows the value and importance of circularity to reduce waste, dependence on resources. And in many instances, it also has value in terms of helping economies become much more competitive. And if you would, to move them up to a higher value added economy that creates more jobs and better jobs, and of course strengthens GDP. Next slide, please. So in terms of how can we approach a circular economy from a practical point of view, or even from an industry perspective? So most of us will be quite familiar with the SDGs, and specifically there's an SDG on responsible production and consumption. So that's definitely some of the areas that we can start with when we think about just how can we think about getting on board this circularity journey. So from production side, and this obviously relates much more to brand owners and manufacturers. How do you design products at the start so that at the end of life, it's either recyclable or it doesn't become waste? And consumption from the consumer perspective is also very important. How do we drive? How do we change habits? How do we get consumers to think to be much more circular? And how can products that they use, instead of being thrown away, can they be repaired or even be shared or not sent to waste? And of course, a key part of circularity is the waste and resource management. So very basic things like waste collection, but also your recycling infrastructure. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share in my next few slides some of, if you would, more real life examples of circularity in action in the food and beverage industry. So in general, one of the key things is perhaps for companies to think about sourcing locally for items, and definitely in some of the larger economies of Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, for example, and Thailand. You have or you're blessed with a multitude of resources that you can use to produce goods locally, high quality goods. So that's where we can start thinking about how by procuring products or ingredients locally, it will save in terms of packaging, in terms of transportation, in terms of emissions. The second part for the food industry, of course, is how do we then look at using byproducts during the production process that can then be reused or recycled into other usable and edible ingredients and things like that. And it's even down to very simple decision making. So a lot of times, raw ingredients are thrown away at the farm level just because they don't meet specific quality requirements of the companies. So rather than just throwing them away, could they then be used either for fertilizers, animal feed, or many times they can still be used into, converted into very edible products for consumption. So we need to really think about how we can look at that. And of course, the other emerging issue within the food and beverage industry is how can we better make use of, for example, water, both in the process of production and even in consumption. And some of you might be familiar, for example, in Singapore, we have a technology we call New Water, which then recycles water from different sources into drinkable water and is then fed into our national water system for consumption to homes and everything like that. So that's the other way. And of course, something major that is taking place in Southeast Asia is the issue of packaging and packaging waste. How can we ensure that packaging is designed for recyclability? And therefore, how can we ensure that there are systems in place to support collection and recycling of packaging waste so that they don't become waste and definitely they don't damage the environment. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share very quickly with you some examples from the Asia region. So in Japan, they're probably one of the most advanced countries in this part of the world when you talk about recyclability. So they have a concept called consumer-friendly waste collection, where all appliances are collected by the retailers, either in the store itself or when it's delivered to homes. And then you also have the manufacturer can collect from consumers, the old equipment, or even at convenient places like a post office. And of course, consumers pay some of the fees upfront, so there's incentive for them not to have the product after the end of its life to be thrown away, but rather to be collected back. Next slide, please. So again, Suntory is, I think a lot of you would be familiar with them. They're also a FIA member. So, and this is some of their 3 Rs are already in practice by many companies, but I think it's worth sharing. And this is especially useful for your small, medium enterprises as they embark on their recyclability and circularity journey. So you look at how, again, certain materials can be replaced so that they enhance recyclability. How can packaging be lightweighted or reformatted or even reduced, when you review and explore ways to improve your packaging. And then, of course, the last one is how some of the materials can be much more recyclable and usable, for example, glass bottles and barrels. Next slide, please. So in Korea, for example, they have something called a green credit card. So it's a bit like a credit card, but you get eco points, and then that allows you to get discounts off product prices, your other discounts on things that we use every day, like electricity, and even public transport. And you can even convert the points to cash to buy other non-green products. So I think this goes back to my earlier point about how can we drive responsible consumption. So this might be a way to nudge also consumers to think about being greener and therefore more circular in their purchasing, and to also support products and companies that are more circular and green, so that if obviously you create a demand and supply. So if we can also nudge more consumers to put their wallets and spend where it's much more appropriate, then I think that's going to be a step in the right direction. The next slide, please. Yes, so closer to home in Vietnam, for example, and I think much like Indonesia, the concept of circularity is still very new, and particularly so for your local companies and the smaller ones. But the multinationals have been going on this journey for quite a while. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of examples. So for example, in Nestle's case, they use the coffee shells as fuels, as fertilizers, and then also waste from the boiler process can be used to make bricks. There's also this also translates to energy savings and reduction on use of wastewater. Coca-Cola is also another example in Vietnam, how they support locally sourced materials. So that really saves a lot in terms of transportation, storage, and therefore packaging, and even energy use and carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So I think just a few perhaps examples or tips on how companies can step up or enhance their circularity approach. It's really how do we get SMEs more involved. And there was a recent study by the UNDP and the Indonesian government on developing a circularity roadmap for the country. And MSMEs are a bulk of the economy, and therefore the focus should also be on them to help them to embark on this journey. So if you can see, for example, in Vietnam, the SMEs contribute quite a significant portion to GDP, as does the informal sector. And again, these are quite similar numbers and trends across Southeast Asia in the larger growing economies. So the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, there's a lot of potential to push on the circularity journey. Of course, what's also key, and this relates very closely to recycling and packaging, how do you create a secondary market for raw materials? So for example, in terms of plastics and packaging, oftentimes we say it's a chicken and egg problem, that while companies are willing and able to increase the use of recycled packaging, but one of the barriers is the lack of a large supply of high quality recyclable material. So that's something that industry definitely can work with the local players and supply chain to improve it. And the last point is just about thinking at the start, at the design process, how do you incorporate circular economy principles into product policy, product planning, and product design, so that you don't wait until the end of life to have a problem that is quite difficult to resolve. Next slide, please. And I apologize if I'm rattling through this quite quickly, but don't worry, I think the slides will be shared. There's opportunities to ask questions. So I think, again, just some of the challenges, the barriers, the opportunities towards a circular economy. So some of these examples are like, how do we get your SMEs and your local companies involved? How do we understand what are the challenges they face? Is it funding? Is it resources? Or is it just availability of technology to them? The next slide, sorry. Yeah, so I think I also wanted to quickly share some of what my organization is doing in the sustainability and circularity space, because a lot of this we believe is related. So the very basic ones are, in investing in data and information. So a few years ago, we did a study on Southeast Asia in terms of tackling plastics and packaging waste. We proactively engage with governments and stakeholders at the local level. We think that's very important. And the third point, which I'll share a little bit more later, is we have then developed industry standards on the use of rPET, for example, in food grade packaging, because in many countries in Asia, the regulations still do not allow the use of recycled content for packaging. And we think that should be permissible because that's a key driver in helping us to meet our circularity and recyclability commitments. We partner with international organizations. I'll touch on that again a little bit more. We had some work, for example, last year with UN Environment on understanding business and consumer perspectives on plastics and packaging. And then the next to last point is on material packaging innovation. So in Singapore, we've established a platform to bring together companies and public sector research agencies to look at what are the main challenges to packaging and to materials, and then to work together on solutions. And the last point, but is the next thing that we want to do, is to look at supply chains. How can we make it more sustainable and more resilient? And so we will also look at things like carbon emissions, reducing food loss and food waste across the supply chain, and resource use. Next slide, please. So these are some of our key focus for the year at least. On the top left, producer responsibility scheme. So this could be EPR, this could be deposit refund schemes, and this could also be working very closely with industry as they develop voluntary systems like what they have here in Indonesia with iPro. And I think my friend from Coca-Cola would be able to share more. Something similar was done also in Vietnam with Pro Vietnam, where companies came together to set up an organization to help with collection and recycling of packaging. And then on the top right, as I shared a little bit earlier on, the standards that we've created, and we want to drive that for adoption across the region so that we'll have harmonized standards on the use of recycled content. The bottom right, I shared packaging innovation, and the bottom left on resilient supply chain. So this represents some of our key focus areas for this year as we want to ramp up our work on circularity. Next, please. Okay, this is something that we developed with our members last year. It's a sustainable packaging roadmap so that we can help keep track of our targets and commitments. Next slide. And this is what I was talking about earlier on, the standards on food contact material. Essentially, we want to look at harmonization, safety, and traceability. And we have developed an industry regulator platform across the region where we want to table these standards for adoption to help drive up recyclability of food packaging. Next slide, please. This is what I just shared with you, the packaging innovation platform in Singapore. You can read more about it later. Next slide. And in the next few slides, this was a study that we did at the UN last year. It covered 5 countries, and we interviewed both local businesses and consumers on their perception towards plastics. And I wanted to share with you some of the key findings so that you can understand where some of the challenges comes in terms of circularity and EPR. Next slide, please. So you can see that most businesses, of course, they are aware of plastic waste, and more can be done. And you can go through and see some of the concerns that they have. The next slide. But this is the key point I wanted to say, that while most of them are aware, not a lot of them across the 5 countries are involved in any sort of platform to talk about tackling the problem. And that's the first start. You need to really get involved with your peers, with stakeholders. Next slide. So these are the 3 key points for the three key constituents from the study, right? For consumers, for food and beverage businesses, and for governments, what needs to be done. And from government, you can see there's a call for them to mandate waste segregation, enhance collection systems, and even right down to imposing littering fines to prevent people from dumping waste. Next slide. I think this next 2 slides I can go through very quickly. This is just about progress of the deposit refund scheme. And I've got 1 minute left. So can you just go through the last few slides? Now, next one. So these are just some of my key takeaways. They don't go against what Dr. Valentina shared, but this is from industry perspective that, we don't oppose EPR, but we want it to ensure that it's fair. And there are other areas that governments should look at first, for example, like recyclable content, mandatory reporting. Next slide. And this is probably my last slide. So again, a reminder that EPR is not a silver bullet. You need to have it in conjunction with waste strategies. You need to have good governance and enforcement. And I think quite importantly, there are other issues that needs to be tackled and addressed, but we have to do it together, both industry and government, to co-develop so that you can ensure that a system that is fit for purpose, tailored to the country, and becomes effective. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Edwin, for your elaboration of the circular economy in the food and beverage industry in Asia. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Arisman from CSEAS Indonesia to present his topic. Mr. Arisman, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Nadira. Okay. Yeah, after we heard from the Valentina and Edwin, looks like the concept of circular economy is quite new in ASEAN, including Indonesia. So I would like to share my views on the challenges and opportunities circular economy implementation in Asia, based on several studies, including our studies. But of course, our studies is still ongoing. So I also refer to several studies in the region. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, this is just introduction already mentioned early by Valentina and Edwin. So the concept of circular economy is very simple. Previous slide. Minimize the disposal of waste and the need for raw materials by keeping existing materials and assets in the production cycle. So we are talking about life cycle analysis about the product. So the transform from the current linear economy, from the take, make, waste, into the reuse, recycle, repair, refurbish, and everything. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, this is based on alpha beta studies as well. Circular economy is economic system of closed loop, which is A, raw materials, component, and product retain their value as much as possible. B, renewable energy source are used, and C, system thinking is at the core. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the 8 trends supporting the shifting to circular economy approach. The first is degradation of natural resources, as we know, the climate change and everything, increasing of price volatility and supply chain risk, and then also the advance in the new technology like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, Industry 4.0, and also there's a trend of increasing consumer acceptance of this new approach or this new concept. And the other is about shifting the labor market, supportive regulatory shift, ability of new capital to support this kind of new investment. And the last one is greater collaboration due to the urbanization. Next. So this is, I quote from the Deloitte, the barriers to circular economy. There's 4 barriers. The first is, we call it cultural barriers. The first is company culture, willingness to collaborate in the value chains, consumer interest and awareness, and then operating in the linear system. The second one is a technological barrier. This is related to how the company redesign their product, the circular design, maybe can explain by Coca-Cola next. Ability, and then the second one is ability to deliver high quality remanufactured product. This is also a challenge. Lack of data, we are talking about on impact. And then the last one is too few large scale pilot project. In the context of market barriers, high upfront investment costs. The second is limited funding for circular business model. The third one is low virgin material prices. And then the fourth one is a standardization. And then from the regulatory barriers, of course, this is need obstructing law and regulation, limited circular procurement, lacking of global consensus. Next. Yeah, if we are talking about players in the circular economy, This I quote also from my study, my reference. The first is a product business. So this company is evolved from the traditional linear model to circular business model. We can consider this is like Adidas, Philips try to decide more on 80% of circular impact. And then B is a solution provider. This is example is a reseller, refurbished product or recycler. The third one is facilitator. This is example is like data brokers, government platform. And then less relevant is the hotel services like HR services and others. Next. Yeah, this is a different type of players and different business model. If we look at the type A, alternative business models, this is the sample in Europe, how to minimize the impact of the product for the life cycle of the bike, and then also for the food waste. This is how to provide circular raw material for downstream companies. And then the third one, type C, is about data platform business model, offer data platform in the building industry. Next. Yeah, for the industry itself, the question is maybe, are you making a product that can last a lifetime? In this use space, this actually is few business doing this because it's conflicting with the revenue and profit target. Okay, next. And then the next phase is a reuse and repair. For this one, to extend life cycle, offer option to reuse product, example via aftermarket, find new user. This is again a very new business taking this phase seriously. Next. This one is also reuse and repair. The same, very business are taking this phase seriously. Next. This phase is return on recycle. This is many business focus on this phase, how to return the product and recycling, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is some examples in Europe. Yeah, how to return and recycling. Already mentioned about the deposit return system by Edwin as well as Valentina in several countries. Next. Yeah, this is just an example of H&M partnership with ICO, but how to close the loop to collect their garment to reuse or reproduce, or yeah, this kind of supply chain by H&M with partners. And then next, this is a bottle industry water player. This is maybe can be explained by Coca-Cola later, but I believe in many countries, PET bottle is one of the highest collection rate. So that's why the deposit return system or take back policy is also more effective in this industry, in this kind of product. If I'm not mistaken, also IPRO Indonesia will start with type A, which is a PET bottle. Next. So economy is all about value chains and ecosystem. So this is my understanding. It's not about recycling only. So this is we are talking about value chains and ecosystem. Next. So there is two different angles to innovate ecosystem. The first is limit the impact of one product line. We design how value can be created for all stakeholders involved, like factory, distribution, retail. And then the second one is make value chains of different product. Company often close by can work together in exchange resources to limit their impact while producing different growth. This is example in Denmark in for the example of this model. Next. So the three principles for circular economy, circular business model and ecosystem. The first is source from the economy, not ecological reserve. The second one is add value to existing product and materials. The third one is create valuable input for business and beyond your customers. Next. This is research by World Resource Institute, the circular economy can create opportunity, and also by avoiding waste, stimulating business growth, and creating job opportunities. Next. Yeah, now I would like to share the latest research by UNDP as well as with Bappenas about circular economy implementation in Indonesia. Indonesia last year did a research analysis of economic, environmental, and social potential of circular economy, already launched with UNDP. So in this year, these stages of development of Indonesia Circular Economy Action Plan. And then next year, creation of the circular economy platform and piloting of the project. We also involved in some of the project with GIZ in Malang Regency. And then 2023, there's a partnership, creation and developing enabling condition. And then 2024 is full implementation guide by national guidelines, RPJM, 2025 until 2029. So this is a 5 years roadmap for Indonesia circular economy. Next. There is a 5 key area of Indonesian economy with high potential for circularity. The first is F&B, already mentioned also by food industry Asia, about food loss and food waste. And then the second one is textile industry, textile waste. If you look at the previous slide about H&M, textile industry. And then the third one is construction waste. This is also quite potential. And then the fourth one is about plastic packaging waste. This is our center still doing research with Norway related to the how to reduce plastic pollution, and also how the role of industry through the several mechanisms, including EPR. And then the last one is e-waste, electronic waste. So this is can solve this 5 sector, and then become potential to be a circularity for these 5 sectors. Next. Yeah, this is again research by UNDP. So if we don't change our economic model, or we call it business as usual, and then how if we shifting to circular approach, this is the data based on the UNDP from these 5 key sectors. So that's why Indonesia is very committed to change, become a circular approach, and also supporting by several industry related to this priority. Next. Yeah, this is the data mentioned about how the benefit of circular economy from the 5 key sectors could contribute for the Indonesian GDP in 2030, which is also contribute to the SDGs number 12, sustainable consumption and sustainable production. Next. Yeah, this is just a simple, we call it a sample of companies try to adopt, yeah, not fully adopting, but adopting means from the area of 5R, reduce, reuse, recycle, refurbish, and renew. There's like Indonesian Bank, BRI, there's a Asani, is about Indonesian electronic rental computer, printers, electronic. And then also for the recycle, especially for organic waste, using the black soldier fly, as well as for refurbish. This is also for the electronic and home appliance. And then the last one about renew, this is EcoWare, produce a cup from farm seaweed or designed for food wrapping and sachet made out of edible seaweed-based material. Again, this is still ongoing, and we don't see is a best practice yet, but this is just again based on research by Alpha Beta. For our research itself, we focus on the plastic waste packaging and the food waste and circular economy, as well as how to implement the EPR. So yeah, this all my presentation. I look forward for discussion. Thank you very much, Nadira.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Isman, for sharing your insights on the circular economy in Indonesia. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Triyono from Coca-Cola Indonesia to present his topic. Mr. Triyono, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadira. Good afternoon, everyone. I think firstly, of course, I'd like to say thank you for CSEAS for inviting me to share, and hopefully, what I share could be useful for everyone and could provide some some reference or maybe some improvement in the future through our discussion. So I think before I start, I also like to maybe put a little bit of I think a bit of disclaimer a little bit. I think there's a lot of theory that already being discussed, a lot of big concept. What I will be sharing is mostly related to the action things on the ground, especially with on Indonesia context. So I think with that, please if the slide can be done next. All right. So I guess this is just putting a context for Indonesia. We know that Indonesia, has been identified as one of the biggest contributor of marine plastic debris. Is a dubious achievement, unfortunately. But I think in terms of we'll try to see it in a positive way. It means that there's a lot of attention is put into this issue, and the government of Indonesia has outlined an ambitious target, 3 ambitious targets actually. One is 70% reduction of marine plastic debris by 2025. The second one is actually 30% reduction of plastic waste through at the source. And then last but not least, a 70% handling rate for all waste. So these are the target that government has put forward. And of course, as a company, as a private sector, we support that kind of target, and we want to be able to contribute to that. So next. So I'm actually using this data that was issued by the National Plastic Action Partnership, which is a platform that is led by the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment for Indonesia. So it shows actually how much plastic is actually being how much plastic waste that actually being generated. So in 2017, on annual basis, is around 6.8 million tons of plastic being generated. And curiously, from this graph, we can see that how much is actually being collected and how much is being recycled. And this actually shows the challenge that Indonesia has. Recycling is there as part of the solution of recycling of circular economy, but challenges are still there, especially in the collection piece. If you can see, from the bottom left, 61% of the 6.8 million ton is actually considered not yet managed properly, and out of that 61%, 48% is actually open burning. So it is a challenge for Indonesia. But I think knowing that we already understand the challenge and we know the fact, I think is now how we can come together to make sure that we can tackle this issue together. Next. So this actually shows a little bit of deep dive in terms of that number. It shows that out of the whole collection system, it is actually concentrated in the big city and the medium scale city. So the challenge and the critical challenge is actually within the rural and the remote area, and that's where most of the plastic waste are not being collected. So, and also those are where mostly the informal sector are not present, because the informal sector, as part of the of the key actors in collection, unfortunately they are more concentrated into the mega city as well as the medium-sized city. Next. So I'm not going to go too much into this because I think it's been covered by previous speakers. It shows the concept of circularity. There's 5 elements of recycle, reduce, substitute, redesign, collect, as well as control disposal. We feel that this concept, I think this is taken from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and established, and this is, we feel that quite fit with the beverage sector, especially for Indonesia. Next. So how does Coca-Cola, especially Indonesia, how can we contribute and how can we be part of the solution as opposed part of the problem? So back in 2018, our CEO announced our aspiration, announced our ambition. It is called the World Without Waste, which is the big vision. And it is part of our aspiration to be part of the solution. And in the GS is actually the big target is how we can help to collect and recycle a bottle or a can for everyone we sell by 2030. So essentially 100% of what we sell, we want to be able to help collect and recycle. So that's the big thing. And of course, to do that, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of detailed, action plan that is to be thought through. And I think market by market or country by country, it will be different. It needs to have that local context. So next slide, please. So this is the way we structured on how we can actually achieve that goal or that vision. There are three big elements, which are design, collect, and then partner. Underneath this is actually, again, coming into the Indonesian context. It may be different from Coca-Cola in different country, but for Indonesia, we feel that this is the right goal and the right details that we want to work with, especially looking at the current situation. So on the design piece is actually how we review and assess our packaging. I think there are if we hear from previous speaker about reduce, reuse, and recycle, I think those elements are embedded into these three principles. And into the design, we also looking at that. We're looking at that elements. So how can we make sure that all our packaging material are 100% recyclable? That's one thing for Indonesia. How we can use more recycled materials in our packaging, and how we can also reduce material usage, especially virgin plastic. So we want to be able to do that for Indonesia. Collection, as everyone can see, from the data that was shared previously, there's a huge challenge of collection, and this is we think that we also will be able to participate and we will be able to contribute. So we want to support the creation of a robust collection system. We want also to make sure that recycling is becoming more accessible to achieve. And then also to help people understand what, how, and where to recycle. I will go into a deeper detail about this collection later on in my later slide. Last but not least, of course, partnership. This is a big problem. This is a huge problem. It is not a problem that can be tackled by one or two or in a single entity or maybe a single individual. So we need to work together, and we believe only through collaboration that we can tackle this issue. Next. So this is quite a busy slide, but I'll try to make it more easy to understand, hopefully. So there are, in terms of design, there are elements that we are focusing on. There is, of course, the recyclability, there are the rPET, and then lightweighting, as well as others. So rPET, or recycled PET bottle, it is one of our aspirations. Globally, we have launched this in different markets. I think in for Asia, there's Philippines. We already launched that. In other part of the world, we have 100% recycled PET bottle already available. For Indonesia, we are working towards that. There are challenges, in Indonesia, which one of them is actually the availability of food grade recycled PET producer, which is not many. So that means we need to work together with them. We need to work together with the recycling industry to be able to increase the capacity, so that availability of food grade recycled PET is becoming more available. Lightweighting is another element, another action that we took since 2014. So there are basically just reducing the amount of plastic that is being used, but also there are other a type of technology that we call ASSP, generated from from Germany, where we where we able to actually reduce the use of plastic by 40% for a certain type of bottle. So those are lightweighting initiative that we also do. And then recently, just last month, we actually introduced the Sprite clear bottle. So this is, we feel, also quite important because of what? Because we found out that a clear bottle is actually has higher value than colored bottle, colored PET bottle. Higher value for the collectors, as well as becoming higher value at the recycler. So we feel that by transitioning Sprite into a clear bottle, that will also help to make sure that those bottles are being recycled. And last but not least, I think globally we also looking at different type of material, alternative material, as not only plastic. We look at, I think in Europe, we are prototyping a paper bottle, but also we are looking at bioplastic as one alternative that we are looking at as well. So there's a number of an initiative in terms of design that we are looking at. Next. So collection, as I mentioned, is a big chunk of our what we are doing in Indonesia. We divide also the collection pillar into 3 element strategy. One is the establishment of what of IPRO, or Indonesian Packaging Recovery Organization. Pak Arisman mentioned about it just a while ago. It is an industry effort. We partner with we join together with a few other FMCG company as well as a packaging company to introduce this a non-profit entity that is focusing on helping to increase collection and recycling of post-consumer packaging waste, plastic as well as beverage carton. So that's one big piece of the collection strategy that we are doing. The next will be community collection. So we partner also with a lot of community across Indonesia, be that a community based on geographic, such as a project that we did in East Java on Eco Ranger. We also partner with youth, especially on digital. So Plastic Ribbon is our idea of supporting the digital startup to go into the waste collection space, and then hopefully able to improve the waste collection system and provide social inclusion to the player in the collection. And then, of course, there are other projects such as Dropbox, which is more simple, providing boxes where the consumer can actually return their bottle, so that makes sure that they are being collected and recycled. And then there are also education and awareness, as well as ensuring that we can help to maintain the cleanliness of river in West Java. Last but not least, on this collection strategy is the consumer engagement. We understand that brand actually have a strong influence in the consumer mind. So we also try to involve brand in our activation. Example is the Sprite clear bottle that I just mentioned previously, where we launched that, as well as we combine that with a campaign for consumer to be able to donate empty bottles, so that it can be turned into a eyeglass frame to be donated to the needy. So combining circular economy principle, combining recycling, but also touching into the element of charity and donation. Next. So this is just a little bit on the Plastic Ribbon, and I mentioned about it earlier. We work with this is an example of what we try to do in the community collection piece. We work with 3 startups, one based in Denpasar, another in Makassar, and another one in Goa, Sulawesi. So they each work on a different aspect of digital, but what we are able to to collaborate with them is actually to make sure that they work together, and then they can improve their their business model to make sure it's more sustainable, and also improve the volume of material that are being collected and eventually being recycled. Next. So no, this is about the PRO. I want to really put a little bit more depth into the PRO, because I think this is quite important. As you know, a lot of other speakers has mentioned about EPR and how we feel that EPRO could be part of the EPR scheme. But also, I think we are promoting as well. It's not only about EPR, but I think how to collaborate with other stakeholders. So talking about not only the producer side, but maybe also government, maybe also consumer, retailers, and other players, to make sure that we can work together. So we look at PRO. Before we launch the Indonesian PRO or IPRO, we look at different models across the world, and 4 countries that actually can come on top that we were looking at are Mexico, South Africa, Japan, and Belgium. And 2 actually represent more of like a developing countries, and another 2 is actually representing a more developed country. So there are different elements that each of these countries have differences in terms of how they have their PRO model, but but together when we look at this PRO, we look at factors that needs to be considered when developing a PRO for Indonesia. And there are 4 that we as an industry feel is quite important. One is how we can involve informal sector from the beginning. We know that informal sector plays an important role in terms of collection and recycling, because they're the one that actually go out in the field and then collecting specific materials, high value materials, and to make sure that they are being included in the recycling stream. So they need to be there. They need to be part of the model. So we don't want to create a model that actually replacing a lot of the player here. Secondly, is actually industry-led. We want to make sure that this PRO is an industry-led initiative. Why? Because this is, I think, part of our contribution to make sure that we tackle the issue of plastic waste, post-consumer plastic waste, and also to make sure that the approach is actually aligned with the condition of the industry, local industry. Third is actually the integration of with existing value chain. I mentioned earlier about the need to work with recycling industry. So this is also critical for PRO to be successful in Indonesia. And last but not least, multi-material. So because within the PRAISE coalition, which is the industry coalition that we contribute to set up, there are different players. There are FMCG player that using different type of material, and we understand that Indonesia also facing multi-material issue on waste. So we want to tackle multi-material. So in the beginning, we already thinking about PET, about HDPE, flexible plastic, as well as beverage carton. Next. Okay, I have my timing is a bit tight, so I'll try to be fast. So this is the in a big picture of how the PRO could work in Indonesia. If you see the graph here on the left, is actually showing a simplified model of how the collection system and the recycling value stream is happening in Indonesia. The waste collector on the left is selling it to the junk shop, selling it to the aggregator, and then goes into the preprocessor, and then the end market solution, which is the recycler. Of course, different material has different maturity throughout this model, but I think this is essentially what is happening in Indonesia. I think our colleague in FIA already mentioned that the informal sector plays an important role here, and this is shown in this graph. So there are 3 types of activity that PRO can do. One is pull activity, meaning driving collection through recycler using market forces. Meaning, an example is actually providing incentive linked to the collection target. So that's one of the example of activity. Secondly, is the push activity, where we try to build the collection ecosystem, help the collector, the existing player in the collection, to build the capacity and capability. And then third is actually the enabling activity, which is education, awareness, and visibility, as well as efficacy. Next. Okay, so we are fortunate that we are able to launch PRO last year in August with the support of the Ministry Luhut, which is the coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment. Next. And I think this is my last slide. It's basically just a few closing thoughts about circular economy. It is as the way forward. It is not a zero-sum game, but it needs supportive regulatory environment, and collaboration and involvement of stakeholders is key, and education awareness is also key to promote mindset and behavior change. Thank you. Look forward for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Triano, for your view on the circular economy in the beverage industry. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Edwin Ineses to present his topic. Mr. Edwin, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hello, good afternoon. Can I ask you, Nadira, to flash my screen? Apparently, my screen is not working right now.
Sure. Can you please share the screen? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, please. So I think I have to make do with the slides that I'm having. Thank you so much. And once again, good afternoon, everyone. And it's my pleasure to be presenting to you at this point of time my presentation on the circular economy of the Philippines. This discussion is primarily focused on the context and challenges and opportunities in the Philippines in the area of circular economy. In particular, I will be talking much on the problem of waste, particularly plastics, as these are used as packaging materials and containers in food and beverage industries. Next slide, please. This number 3 shows us the rank of, next slide, please. This number 3 shows us the rank of the Philippines, but this number is something that we cannot be proud of because I think we are also one with Indonesia and China, that we're not so proud about this being considered as one of the top 3 countries to have contributed much to waste in the full world. The number of waste that is being mismanaged are dominated by these 3 countries, including the Philippines. To be specific, the average person, based on the Gaia latest report in 2019, they have done a study and used the waste assessment and brand audit developed by the Mother Earth Foundation in 21 cities and municipalities in the Philippines. And they found out that an average Filipino actually uses 591 pieces of sachet, next slide please, 174 shopping bags, 163 plastic labo, these are single-use plastics, and a total of 48 million shopping bags are used daily, or translated into 17.5 billion pieces yearly. In addition, around 45.2 million pieces of plastic labo is also used daily in the country, which translates to 16.5 billion yearly. Next slide, please. If we are still to add the diapers, which I don't think it's part of the food and beverage industry, though they also contain something, the question that probably we should be thinking about is, where do this go? No? So definitely, the Philippines is contributory to that, being one of the 3 countries in the whole world that contributes much, according to oceana.org. Next slide, please. But here's the good news about it. No? Based on this same report, roughly 50% of total waste generated is organic waste. I should say this is a good news because this only suggests that roughly half of the waste that is generated, aggregated in the whole country can still be salvaged and returned to the environment towards a more circular economy. But out of the 50% or half, 52% comes from sachet, and 164 sachets from sari-sari stores are used daily in that same report. Next slide, please. Translated into year, it amounted to 59.7 billion sachets a year. So this would be actually enough to cover 130 soccer fields in sheer volume alone. And here's another thing. 50% of unrecycled waste is branded waste. And here's something more juicy. Out of the 10 companies, out of the 60% of the branded waste, 10 companies are responsible for actually doing it. In fact, there was even another report that the 3 companies, top 3 polluters in the Philippines, already generated roughly 46% of the total waste. Next slide, please. That only shows that indeed there is so much of a challenge as far as Philippine waste management system is concerned. This definitely is a threat and a very inimical to the movement of the country towards a more circular economy. Next slide, please. In another audit, this is different from the Gaia report, but this is also a brand audit, and this was done by Break Free from Plastic movement in 2020. And the audit was done in 17 cleanup sites, and they found out that only 2% of those that were collected can actually be considered recyclable, and the rest are non-recyclable. And many of the waste generated, collected, and audited were actually sachets and PET bottle, those that are coming from the producers, those that are coming from the food and beverage industry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Out of the 10 corporations, these are considered as the top polluters in the country based on that report by Break Free from Plastic movement and by Gaia. Like what I said earlier, 3 corporation packaging waste accounts for 46% of the total items that were collected. And in your screen, you probably are seeing 10 of the plastic polluters in the country. Universal Rubina, Nestle, Colgate, Palmolive, and even one from Indonesia, Mayora Indah. And the rest are also contributory because they belong to the food and beverage and industries in the country. Next slide, please. So what we have seen so far is that indeed there's so much of a challenge as far as the movement towards circular economy in the Philippines. We already have so much waste to deal with. But add to that, which may not necessarily be food and beverage industry, but it's also worth noting that in addition to the waste that we already have, we are even sidelighted by several waste trades that were dumped in the area of the Philippines. For instance, if you look at the slides right at this moment, you will be seeing that Japan in the 1999, these by the way are highly publicized cases, these are known in the world. Japan has given us 120 container vans, Canada in 2014, 55 container vans, South Korea in 2018, 201 container vans, Australia in 2019, 9 container vans, and Hong Kong in 2019, 1 test container vans, and 70 others were intercepted before it actually landed in the Philippines. So again, what this tries to tell us is that we have already so much of a challenge in the country, in addition to those other ways, which may not necessarily be coming from food and beverage, because most of those are actually hospital waste and electronic waste. But the point still remains that we have so much as a challenge here in the country. Next slide, please. What you're seeing on your screen right at this very moment, on the top photo, you're seeing the exploration in the Emden Deep. It's fortunate that one of our scientists from the University of the Philippines, Deo Onda, was one of the very few who actually went there. And what he found out has something to do with the plastics. No? In fact, in his statement, he was actually expecting, because of the pressure, no, in the deepest, in the third deepest part of the world, that the plastics there would now become fragments. But he was actually wrong, because they were so intact as if they just came from the supermarket. So again, what this tries to tell us is that apart from what we already have, there are even more emerging problems as far as waste management, which runs contrary to circular economy in the country. The bottom photo shows a diving site in the Philippines, in Anilao. And this is another case in which we can see that an emergent waste, particularly from personal protective equipment, is really challenging the country as far as its movement towards circular economy is concerned, as far as its movement towards its waste or proper waste management. Next slide, please. But enough can be said. No? We have seen that the Philippines is already at this point of time in which the challenge is so much. Nonetheless, we have to be fair as far as the country is concerned, in the sense that there are several efforts, and in fact, a lots of pocket opportunities that we are seeing as far as several sectors in the country, countries are doing in waste management, or in particular in its movement towards circular economy. Next slide, please. Let me talk about the government first. If you check on the slide, what you're seeing is a photo. And in that photo is actually one of our senators, Cynthia Villar, an advocate, a staunch advocate on environment. And she was actually calling for extended producer responsibility. Why is that so? Because despite the fact that we already have a law as far as early as 2000, the RA 9003, Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, that provides for producers to be responsible for their waste, it's apparent that we still have problems. And definitely the government, our government, is doing its job as much as possible to somehow arrest this problem, so that the move of the country should be towards a more circular economy, a more inclusive circular economy, as also depicted in one of the talks of that senator of ours, Senator Villar, on EPR. Likewise, one of the things that the government does, led by DENR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, out of the 27 billion national budget of the department, around 1.25 billion are actually earmarked for protection and management of the environment. This is one of the processes by which the government can eventually lead towards a more circular economy. Likewise, if you look at another effort of the government, the DENR, together with the UNDP, is also finalizing right at this moment a national action plan on marine litter. So hopefully, all of these efforts coming from the government will be able to find its way into the real world as far as management of waste and circular economy in the country is about. Next slide, please. This slide points to the efforts, collective efforts actually, of local government of Pasig and Unilever in partnership with CMEX. No? Unilever is one of the top polluters in the country as far as food and waste and beverage industry. You know? And based on what they have been doing so far, they are still contributing something. They initiate a community-based sachet recovery program. This is similar to what we have heard from my namesake, Edwin Saya, earlier, about some of the efforts in some parts of ASEAN. And what this does is that this Unilever goes to certain barangays in the local government and initiates a sachet recovery program in exchange for their own product also built and packaged in sachet. And another thing is that they also convert waste, what they collected, into school chairs and cement pavers in partnership with the CMEX. Likewise, they also run shampoo and conditioner refilling station in some areas in the country. And globally, they are committed by 2025 to 100% use of packaging that can be reused or at least recyclable, or at least reused. Next slide, please. The next slide, what you're seeing is in Nestle. Nestle is also the top two, actually, no? Top contributor in food and beverage industry in the Philippines. Nestle, what you're seeing in the picture is a perspective of what Nestle vows to help or to provide in local governments, particularly starting with Barangay 1664 in Caloocan City. So they are trying to sponsor the construction of the facility, and they're also committing by 2025 that 100% would also be recyclable and reusable. Next slide, please. The next producer is Procter & Gamble Philippines. This is also one of the top 10. And Procter & Gamble is also joining in partnership with the Alliance for Recycling and Material Sustainability to also build a facility that converts sachets into plastic blocks and eco bricks. And as far as Rafi Fajardo, the Philippine President and General Manager of P&G, their goal is to make 100% of their packaging recyclable and reusable by 2030. And this they do by their design choices or packaging design choices, brand motivations, and partnerships with society. Next slide, please. This is one of the things that I find interesting, no? Because this touches on the cultural consumerism of Filipinos that has something to do with retail sales. No? This Wala Usik is actually an initiative by some entrepreneurs in Bacolod City, somewhere in Visayas, in launching the spirit of tingi through Wala Usik stores. Wala Usik in local language means nothing is really wasted. So again, this does not run contrary to the way Filipinos do things, which is to buy in sachet. But it cuts the use of plastics or unnecessary plastics or single-use plastics because they are more into refilling rather than providing additional plastics or virgin plastics for that matter. So this is a good initiative coming from the entrepreneurs in Bacolod. Next slide, please. This one, in the picture, what you're seeing, this is not really a top producer or top polluter in the country, but I included it here. Definitely, I won't be able to include a lot of the initiatives or many or most of the initiatives that were done in this country as far as its movement towards circular economy. But one thing that I like about this is that this is actually a bottled water. And for sure, you might not have heard of this, Hope in a Bottle. So this company is managed by Nanette Medbed. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar to her because she used to be famous in the Philippines before. But one thing is good about this is that just recently, last year, Hope in a Box, as a producer of water, which is not packaged and bottled, bagged the best CSR for 2020 at the Global Water Drinks Awards, simply because they donated 100% of their profits just to build classrooms and other nation building activities. So it's not just that they are donating these profits, but 75% based on what they were saying, they used renewable resources that were certified by FSC. In fact, the Hope in a Bottle is actually getting this award, so to speak. Next slide, please. If you check on Google or probably Facebook or any other social media, these are some of the many things that you probably will be seeing that were construed as initiatives in the country. There are so many of them. This does not just even scratch the sheer volume of those civil society groups. So from what we have seen so far, the government, the business sector, and even the civil society are actually doing their part as far as waste management and movement to circular economy in the country is concerned. But let me just highlight probably two, the JU cycle. This has nothing to do with the food and beverage industry, but what they do, they actually help the food and beverage industry that produces the waste simply because they use the plastics as a kiln for their cement. No? The brand that of the cement is Holcim. And another one, which is very a bit famous in circular economy in the Philippines, and that is no other than Carlo Delantar of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're really doing something as far as circular economy in the Philippines. So what, again, I'm trying to tell is that a lot of this are doing so much. And these are several economic agents. We're not just talking of producers here. We're not just talking of consumers here. We're also talking of government and the civil society actively taking part towards circular economy in the Philippines. Next slide, please. However, though, it appears, according to some groups like Break Free from Plastic Movement, many of this, they regarded that producers are just doing some efforts to greenwash, to appear more environmental friendly. You're not really changing the true nature of their business. In fact, ASEAN reported that only 9% of all plastic waste generated has been recycled. And out of the sachet recovery programs of many of these top producers, they only ended and were able to capture just roughly around 10 million sachets per year out of the 60 billion that they collectively produce in a given year. And Ellen MacArthur Foundation reports that the signatories even to New Plastics Economy Global Commitment, or of the top polluters, have only reduced their use of virgin plastic by only 0.1% from 2018 to 2019. Again, what we're trying to talk about here is that many of these initiatives are more curative in nature rather than preventive. That to some extent, even those progressive groups would label those things or those efforts, particularly from the producers, as only greenwashing. The recycling, for example, we're not really going something against recycling. Definitely, recycling is one of the many wins, but recycling is more of a curative part rather than preventive. I think the idea here is we have to look at it from the source, and we have to curb it right at the source. And probably producers could have something much about this. There are prospects towards economy in the Philippines. It's depicted in many of the efforts. But again, this requires the comprehensive effort of all economic agents, the government, the private sector, the civil society, and the consumers as a whole. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edwin, for your presentation on the circular economy in the Philippines. And thank you once again to our panelists for each of your insightful takes on circular economy and how it is applied in the food and beverage industry, as well as in different parts of the world. With that, I conclude the presentation session. We have just under 20 minutes left, and we'll now move on to the Q&A session and read out a few of the questions which have been picked. First, we have a question from Ms. Tulus from Budi Luhur University, directed to both Mr. Edwin Sia and Dr. Valentina. The question is, what has changed and what have become the main challenges during the pandemic? For example, due to safe packaging, sanitizing, government assistance, policy harmonization at the regional level. Maybe Mr. Edwin can answer first in the case of Asia, and then Dr. Valentina in the case of Europe. Thank you, Mr. Edwin.
Thanks, Nadira, and thanks for the question. I think what has happened over the course of the last year with COVID-19, in a sense, has backed up what we have been saying for many, many years, that we should not be so fixated on the material, but instead we should think about investments in basic infrastructure or waste collection and management. And I think some of the other presenters have shared what industry is doing on our part develop voluntary organizations to help communities and countries in which we operate to enhance collection and recycling. And I think that part needs to be stepped up and not forgotten, especially as we transition, to look at green growth and post-COVID recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Valentina.
Yes, thank you for the question as well. I think for the Europe case, there is a deeper worry that COVID-19 will reverse the momentum that has been created to cut down on the single-use plastic. This because during the pandemic has been a dramatic increase in the use of plastic. Demand has risen sharply for packaging for groceries and also to take away food from restaurants, and and in the same time there was an increasing reluctance from the consumer side on using reusable bags or other related products. And before the pandemic, there were many shops and restaurants that were promoting this use of reusable products. And from the industry side, for instance, the Plastic Recycles Europe have said that the pandemic will have a heavy price on the industry, and the sector might be risking ceasing the production due to the closure of processing facilities, and also due to the record low prices of the virgin plastic. And last but not least, it also opened a debate about postponing the implementation of the single-use plastic directive. As a matter of fact, the European plastic converters have made a petition to the European Commission and the member states to postpone for at least an additional 1 year at the national level the implementation of this directive, saying that single-use plastic are not easy to replace, and they are extremely necessary in maintaining hygiene and health and safety. But their request has been rejected by the Commission and has been considered to be an excuse to undo things that actually need to be done anyway. So I think these are the main effects of the pandemic on the industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Edwin-Sia and Dr. Valentina, for your insights. Next, we have another question from Ms. Ratih Widyaningsi from DSL for Mr. Arisman to answer. The question is, do we in Indonesia already have strong regulation that can be easily implemented to push the company to do circular economy for their product? Mr. Arisman, please, if you may answer.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Nadira. Yeah, I don't like the term of push. Yeah, maybe like Indonesia, we have a regulation on the EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Roadmap, which is just launched in the end of 2019. But we still need more technical guidelines, because again, I believe the effective policy should be not from the one side, should be discussed with the stakeholders, with the players, with the actors in the industry. So because they are the one who implement F&B industry. So I think the initiative like Price, the group of company to implement the IPRO is one of the best practice, because can you imagine if every company have to collect their own waste by themselves? Is it very effective or efficient to do that? So this is also a question. So again, from my side, need more incentive system, not just push the company to do it, but how to make them do it by build a incentive system. I think this is from my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Arsman, for your answer. Next, we have a question from Mr. Irdanto from the Circular Plastics Research Group. The question is directed to Mr. Triono. And the question is, how does Coca-Cola see EPR scheme in Indonesia or Asia context? Who and how to invest on the waste management infrastructure such as collection, sorting, and recycling? Mr. Triono, if you can please answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadira. I think to answer Mr. Irdanto questions about EPR, I cannot represent outside of Indonesia because I'm based in Indonesia. So I think in Indonesia we look at the EPR. It is already a regulation that has been issued by the government. So as a company, we will comply for sure. We will comply by the regulation. I think it was mentioned earlier that actually what we seek is actually not only compliance, but also how to be able to work together with government, with other stakeholders. So I mean the issue of waste in Indonesia specifically is quite challenging, quite huge. I think there's a lot of opportunity where actors like us, like producer, like company can do, but also there are by law I think there are responsibility where government could also provide the infrastructure for waste collection, and also I think in the consumer side there could be some action, individual action, where we can actually start doing simple thing like segregating our waste, to make sure that we can contribute to make sure to have that plastic waste becoming easier to process, even either through circular economy, through recycling or other means. So I think there's a lot of component, there's a lot of actor, there's a lot of stakeholder that needs to work together. But for sure, with regards to EPR, we will comply, and it is a regulation. But I think we still need to work together to make sure that the EPR that is implemented in Indonesia is actually the EPR that is suitable for Indonesia context. Hopefully that answers the question.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chiono, for your answer. And we have another question for Mr. Edwin Ineses. The question is there any monitoring and incentive mechanism in the Philippines for the industry in implementing a circular economy? Mr. Edwin Ineses, if you can answer.
Good afternoon. The government provided so much incentives, as far as this are concerned, through several laws, and one of those through the CSR is definitely tax cuts. And I hope that those will be more than enough for the private sector, for the producers, to respond on the goal of the national government towards circular economy.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Edwin Ineses, for your answer. Now we have another question from Ms. Yunawati from GAPMI, and this is open to any speakers who wish to answer. The question is, and I quote, "I think there is another R other than the 3R, which is the return to Earth. However, little is said on this R. Can the speakers give explanation on this R and an example initiative for this?" Maybe does anyone want to start?
Thank you for the question. The only return to Earth thing that comes to my mind now, I don't know if it's an R, is what I read about is this return to Earth plastic bags from an Australian company. Are these bags that are starting degrading after some 2-3 years, and they can safely break down after 5 years, so they can be basically fully recycled. This is I hope this answers somehow the question, but I'm not familiar with any R, like from the literature I've read. There are many classifications with different type of R's, but this one, I missed this one. So thank you to the person from the audience that informed about it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Valentina. Mr. Arsman, you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree with Valentina. I never find the other R. Maybe this is very philosophical R, return to earth, because like human, we back to nature to, but maybe this is, we are more on, maybe the question is focused on how the materials, I'm not sure about the question, but looks like return to earth means maybe like mentioned by Valentina is how far, how long the plastic can back to the earth or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, this is my comment. I'm not sure about the return to earth. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arisman. Does anyone else want to add? Maybe Mr. Chiono, you would like to say something?
Yeah, I know. I guess it's similar to what I think Valentina already mentioned. I think it's more, I guess it's more related to biodegradable packaging. So I think within the context of I guess food and beverage industry, there are types of food and beverage that I think could use biodegradable packaging for sure. And I think we need to see it case by case. So if that is possible to do, and if I think if government can also provide some kind of incentive model where this technology can be further enhanced, can be further improved, so that it can become commercialized, then I think it could be one solution. I think what I understand is actually this issue of overall circular economy. There is no one single bullet that actually can cover all of the problems. So it must, we have different kind of solution for different kind of problem to make sure that circular economy is implementable. So hopefully that can add something to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiono, for your insight. Maybe Mr. Edwin Sia or Mr. Edwin Ineses would like to add to the answer.
Yeah, I think just to add on, there's two aspects in my mind. So one, I think we've already discussed about looking at new materials that are biodegradable, that doesn't harm the environment. And in Singapore, we're doing some research on PHA, on producing marine biodegradable flexible packaging for food. So it can degrade in the ocean at a shorter time. And it's safe even for marine life should they consume. The other part I can think of with regard to the question is probably a bit of like what we're doing in carbon offset. So you how do we contribute industry, stakeholders, NGOs, government to try to replenish and replace some of the natural resources that we have consumed, whether it's a forest or water or anything. And I think many companies, many industries are doing that. So we just need to continue and we just need to build up scale so that it will help to replenish some of the resources that unfortunately are necessary to be taken out from Mother Nature.
Thank you, Mr. Edwin Sia. Mr. Edwin Ineses, would you like to close?
On my end, there is really more to circular economy than the recycling or probably all of the R's. And I think one of the things that we have to do is to look at it from the source. As far as food and beverage industry, I think the pollution has something to do with the packaging and containers. So in the case of the Philippines, for instance, I think we really have to go back to the basics. Long time ago, most of our products, for example, our suman or ibos, I'm not so sure if you're familiar with that, but our suman, this is a rice steak. These are actually placed in a biodegradable, in fact, a leaves of a coconut. No? So this is just some of the illustrations in which I think one of the basic things that we can do is to really consider those materials or packaging materials that are used in food and beverage industry in something that can circularly return and can be used and reused, etc., etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwin Ineses, for your answer. And with that last question, I conclude the question and answer session. Thank you to all attendees on YouTube for your participation, and our sincere apologies if we could not accommodate all the questions due to the time constraint. On behalf of CSEAS, I would also like to express my gratitude again to our 5 distinguished speakers today, Dr. Valentina, Mr. Edwin Sia, Mr. Arisman, Mr. Chiono, and Mr. Edwin Ineses for all your exceptional and insightful presentations. With that, I will officially end this training session on circular economy in the food and beverage industry. Once again, thank you for your attendance, and I hope that all of us remain in good health. Have a good day ahead, and we hope to see you all on our next events. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Stay
everyone.
safe.
you.
Take care.
Stay safe.
Stay
Bye-bye.
safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.